The Galactic Council chamber felt different. Now 6 months had passed since the duel. 6 months of negotiations and discussions and slowly building trust. And Ambassador Yun Surin stood at her delegation podium watching history unfold before her eyes. Drothkal walked to the center of the chamber floor. But this time, there was no terror in the eyes of the assembled delegates. Only curiosity and something that might have been hope. "We came to this place, seeking conquest," the Vorthrek Supreme announced, his voice carrying through the chamber without the menace it once held. "We believed that power was the only thing that mattered. That strength was measured in how many enemies you could destroy. That the galaxy belonged to whoever was willing to take it." He paused, and Siren saw him look toward the human delegation, toward the empty seat where Ji-hoon would have sat if he had not been on Earth recovering from his injuries. "We were wrong." The whispers that swept through the chamber were different from the panicked murmurs of 6 months ago. Filled with surprise and cautious optimism instead of fear. "The humans taught us something we did not know we were missing," Drothkal continued. "They showed us that true strength is not measured in destruction, but in protection. Not in how many you can kill, but in how many you are willing to die for." He raised one massive arm, and his warriors stepped forward to stand beside him. "The Vorthrek do not seek dominion over this council," he declared. "Instead, we propose an alliance with humanity. The two apex predator species of our galaxy, united not in conquest but in guardianship." The chamber erupted in discussion. Delegates from every species turning to each other with expressions ranging from disbelief to joy. And Siren felt tears pricking at her eyes as she realized what this moment meant. They had done it, against all odds, against every prediction, against the certainty of failure. They had found a way through. The alliance was ratified 3 months later, and the Human Vorthrek Coalition became the most powerful peacekeeping force in galactic history. 50 years past. Admiral Baek Ji-hoon, retired now at the age of 87, stood in the courtyard of the Joint Military Academy on Threshold Prime, watching cadets from both species train side by side. His prosthetic arm bore both human and Vorthrek designs now, a gift from Drothkal on the 10th anniversary of their duel. Crafted by the finest engineers of both worlds working together, the Academy had been built on the site of the old arena of Kethmora, the place where two civilizations had tried to destroy each other and instead found something neither had expected: understanding. The cadets moved through their exercises with practiced precision. Human and Vorthrek working as partners, learning from each other's strengths, compensating for each other's weaknesses. A young Vorthrek named Kethara, now a decorated commander in the Coalition fleet, walked up beside him. "Admiral," she said, inclining her head in respect, "my uncle sends his regards. He wishes he could be here for the ceremony." "How is the old warrior?" Ji-hoon asked, smiling at the memory of the massive creature who had once tried to crush his throat, complaining about the food on his medical ship. Kethar replied, "The doctors say his condition is stable, but he refuses to rest. Keeps demanding mission reports and strategic updates." "That sounds like him. He wanted me to give you this." She handed him a small data crystal, and Ji-hoon activated it to find a recorded message from Drothkal. Vorthrek Supreme looked old now, his scarred face marked by decades of service, his one remaining eye still sharp despite his age. "Old friend," Drothkal's voice rumbled from the recording, "I am told that today marks the 50th anniversary of our duel. 50 years since a small human with more courage than sense stood up to the most powerful predator in the galaxy." He laughed, the same grinding sound that had once filled Ji-hoon with dread, but now felt like the voice of family. "I have thought often about that day," Drothkal continued, "about what would have happened if your ambassador had stayed silent, if you had not come to face me, if humanity had simply accepted defeat like every other species before you." His expression grew serious. "The Vorthrek would have conquered the council. Of course, we would have ruled through fear for a few generations. And eventually, we would have grown bored and moved on to the next galaxy, leaving nothing behind but ruins and memories of terror. He shook his head slowly. Instead, we found something worth staying for. We found a purpose beyond survival. We found allies who taught us that strength means nothing if you have nothing worth protecting. The recording shifted, showing images of human Vorthric coalition ships responding to disasters across the galaxy, saving lives, protecting the weak, standing guard over civilizations that had once trembled at the mention of Vorthric name. In 50 years, we have saved more lives than my ancestors destroyed in 1,000, Drothgal said. We have built more than we have broken, protected more than we have conquered, and earned respect instead of demanding fear. His voice softened. And it all began because one human refused to stay down. The recording ended, and Ji-hoon stood in silence for a long moment, remembering the young captain who had held a support beam for 5 hours, who had faced a monster twice his size with nothing but stubbornness and hope, who had lost an arm but gained something far more valuable, a friend, a purpose, a galaxy that would never be the same. That evening, Drothkal's shuttle landed at the academy against the explicit orders of his doctors, and the old Vorthric Supreme made his way to the memorial wall that stood at the center of the campus. The wall listed every human and Vorthric who had died in service to the Coalition, names carved in both languages side by side, a testament to shared sacrifice and shared purpose. Ji-hoon was already there. As Drothgal had known he would, Beatty, 2 old warriors stood together in silence, looking at the names of those who had given everything. A young cadet asked me today why the Vorthrak changed. Drothgal said finally, why we gave up conquest for protection, why we chose to stand beside humanity instead of above them. What did you tell them? I told them that we were apex predators, the Vorthrak Supreme replied. That we thought our strength made us powerful. That we believed the galaxy existed for us to take. He turned to look at his old friend, at the human who had shown him a different way to live, and then we met a species that hunted through persistence, that loved without reason, that died for strangers without hesitation. And we learned that true strength is not in what you can destroy. He placed his massive clawed hand beside the human flowers already resting at the base of the memorial. True strength is in what you choose to protect. Ji-hoon smiled and reached out to clasp the Vorthrak's arm. You want to get a drink? He asked. I know a place on the observation deck where we can watch the stars. Drothgal considered this for a moment, then nodded. I would like that very much. The 2 old warriors walked away from the memorial together, leaving the names of their fallen comrades behind, walking toward a future that neither could have imagined 50 years ago behind them. Human and Vorthrak cadets continued their training, preparing to face whatever challenges the galaxy would throw at them, secure in the knowledge that they would face those challenges together, because that was what it meant to be part of something bigger than yourself. That was what it meant to be human, and now, that was what it meant to be Vorthrak too. The galaxy had changed that day in the council chamber when a small human diplomat stepped forward and refused to back down. It would never be the same again, and that was exactly how it should be. Ji-hoon woke up in a medical bay that smelled like antiseptic and recycled air. And the first thing he noticed was that his left arm ended just below the elbow. The second thing he noticed was that he was still alive. A human doctor appeared at his bedside, explaining in gentle tones that the damage had been too severe to save the limb, that they had done everything they could, that he was lucky to be breathing. At Ji-hoon just nodded and asked about Drothkal's. Doctor's expression shifted to something between confusion and wonder. He survived, she said. Lost his right eye permanently, has significant scarring across his face and upper body, but he will make a full recovery. Good, Ji-hoon said, and he meant it 3 days later. Ambassador Siren visited him with news that changed everything, according to Kethmora tradition. A duel that ended without clear victory meant both parties retained their honor and their claims, which meant the Vorthrak could not simply conquer the Council. But it also meant humanity had not defeated them. The situation was a stalemate. The Vorthrak were demanding a rematch. "What do you want to do?" Siren asked him. Jihoon thought about it for a long moment, remembering the feel of Drothkal's claws around his throat, remembering the respect in the Vorthrak Supreme's voice when he demanded surrender. "I want to invite them to Earth," he said. Siren stared at him. "You want to what?" "Invite them to Earth," he repeated. "Show them who we really are, not just how we fight, but how we live." It took 2 weeks of negotiations, but eventually Drothkal accepted the invitation. He arrived on Earth with a delegation of 12 Vorthrak, including several scientists, 2 military advisors, and to everyone's surprise, a young female named Kethara, who was apparently his niece. They landed in Geneva, where the United Earth government had arranged an official welcome. But Siren had other plans instead of diplomatic ceremonies and formal dinners. She took them on a tour of humanity. They visited Tokyo first, walking through streets crowded with millions of humans going about their daily lives. And Drothkal watched in silence as creatures smaller than his arm moved around him without fear, some of them even stopping to take pictures with the massive alien visitors. They visited the Sahara Reclamation Project, where humans had spent a century turning desert into farmland, fighting against nature itself to create something green and growing, where nothing had grown for thousands of years. They visited the Memorial Wall in Berlin, where the names of every human who had died in every war were carved into black stones stretching for kilometers. A reminder of the cost of violence and the importance of peace. Drothkal stood before that wall for almost an hour, reading name after name after name. "You kill each other," he said finally. "Your own species. You kill in numbers I cannot comprehend." "We did," Siren admitted, standing beside him. "For a very long time. We were our own worst enemies, and yet you stopped." "Mostly," she said. "We are still learning." The Vorthrak Supreme turned to look at her, his scarred face unreadable. "My people have never fought a civil war," he said. "We expand outward. We conquer others. But we do not turn on ourselves." "Maybe that is why you do not understand us," Siren suggested. "We have spent our entire history fighting ourselves, which means we have spent our entire history learning how to forgive ourselves, how to rebuild, how to become better than we were." Drothkal considered this for a long moment. "Perhaps," he said finally. The next day, they visited Jihoon in the military hospital, where he was learning to use his new prosthetic arm. They, 2 former combatants, sat across from each other in Jihoon's small room, neither speaking at first, both carrying scars from their encounter. "You could have killed me," Jihoon said finally. "At the end, when you had your claws around my throat." "You hesitated." Drothkal nodded slowly. "I saw something in your eyes," he admitted. "Something I had never seen before in a creature I was about to kill." "What was it?" "Hope," the Vorthrak Supreme said. "You were dying. You knew you were dying. And still you hoped." He leaned forward, his massive frame making the hospital chair creak dangerously. "My people do not hope," he continued. "We conquer, we survive, we dominate. But we do not hope for things, we simply take them. And when I saw that hope in your eyes, I did not understand what I was seeing. Do you understand now?" "I am beginning to." That afternoon, something happened that no one had planned for. Kethara, the young Vorthrak female, wandered away from the delegation during a tour of a local park. Curious about the human children playing near a river, she was watching them from a distance when the ground beneath her feet gave way, and she tumbled down the riverbank into the water. Vorthrak were not swimmers. Their dense bone structure and heavy armor plating made them sink like stones. and Cathara thrashed helplessly as the current dragged her downstream. Human civilians saw her folly: a teacher named Park Eunji, a construction worker named Kim Do-won, and a teenage student named Lee Minji. None of them were soldiers. None of them knew anything about Vorthrak physiology or how dangerous the young alien could be if she panicked. They just saw someone drowning and jumped in to help. The rescue was chaotic and dangerous, with Cathara's flailing claws cutting all three humans in various places. But they managed to drag her to the riverbank and hold her head above water until emergency services arrived. Park Eunji had to be treated for a punctured lung. Kim Do-won lost 2 fingers. Minji required 47 stitches across her arms and chest. None of them regretted their actions. For a single moment, Drothel arrived at the scene to find his niece wrapped in thermal blankets and crying, surrounded by bleeding humans who were refusing medical treatment until they were sure she was all right. He stared at them for a long time. "Why?" he asked finally, his voice rough with emotions he did not have names for. "Why would you risk your lives for a child of the species that threatened to enslave you?" Kim Do-won looked up at him, one hand wrapped in bloody bandages, and shrugged. "She was drowning," he said simply. "What else were we supposed to do?" That night, Drothkel requested a private meeting with Ambassador Sirin. "I think I finally understand," he told her. "What makes your species different? What makes you dangerous in ways that have nothing to do with strength or speed or weapons? And what is that?" The Vorthrak Supreme looked out the window at the city lights of Geneva, at the millions of humans living their lives below, at a world that had nearly destroyed itself a dozen times and kept choosing to rebuild. "You will die for anyone," he said. "Not just your own people, not just your allies, but anyone, even your enemies, even strangers, even a child of the species that came to conquer you." He turned to face her. "My people became the apex predators of our world by being the most dangerous thing in any room. But you became the apex predators of yours by being willing to sacrifice everything for each other. And now I understand why we could never truly conquer you." "Why is that?" "Because you cannot conquer a people who will die for strangers," Drothkel said. "You can kill them, you can destroy their cities and burn their worlds. But you cannot break them, because their strength does not come from their bodies or their weapons. It comes from something inside them that we do not have." He placed one massive clawed hand over his chest. "But perhaps," he said slowly, "perhaps we can learn." The arena of Cathmora had been built into the heart of Threshold Prime 3,000 years ago, a massive dome designed to simulate any environment in the galaxy. And today it had been configured to replicate the hellscape of the Vorthrak homeworld. Jehung stepped through the entrance and immediately felt the gravity trying to crush him into the floor 3 times. "Earth normal," the briefings had said, and he understood now why the Vorthrak moved the way they did. Every step felt like walking through thick mud, and the air that leaked through his environmental suit tasted like poison and burning metal. He had 17 minutes of filtered oxygen after that. He would be breathing the same toxic atmosphere that the Vorthrak called home across the arena. Drothkel stood waiting, his massive form perfectly at ease in the crushing gravity, his natural armor gleaming under the harsh red lights that simulated his world's dying sun. The observation galleries were packed with representatives from every species in the council, watching through reinforced barriers as the 2 champions faced each other. Ambassador Sirin stood in the human section, her hands gripped tight on the railing, her face pale but determined. Jehun looked up at her and nodded. Once she nodded back, the signal sounded, a deep resonant tone that echoed through the arena. And Drothkel charged. He moved faster than anything that size had any right to move, crossing the distance between them in 3 massive strides, all 4 arms raised to strike, claws gleaming with molecular sharpness. Jehun did not try to block. He threw himself sideways, rolling under the strike, letting momentum carry him away from the impact zone, and came up running. The Vorthrak's claws carved grooves into the arena floor where he had been standing. "You run like prey," Drothkal growled. Spinning to face him, "Is this what human courage looks like?" "This is what human survival looks like," Jihoon replied, circling to keep distance between them. "We learned a long time ago that fighting fair against something bigger than us was a good way to die." He kept moving, forcing Drothkal to turn, studying the way the massive creature shifted its weight. Looking for patterns in its movement, the Vorthrak charged again, and again Jihoon evaded, taking a glancing blow to his shoulder that sent him tumbling across the arena floor, but did not connect solidly enough to cause real damage. His suit's integrity held 15 minutes of oxygen remaining. "You cannot dodge forever," Drothkal said, stalking toward him. "Eventually you will tire. Eventually you will slow. And then I will end this." "You are right," Jihoon admitted, getting back to his feet. "I cannot dodge forever." He reached into the small pouch at his belt and pulled out a handful of fine metallite dust, a substance used in mining operations to mark tunnel walls. "But I do not need forever." He threw the dust directly at Drothkal's face. The Vorthrak roared and stumbled backward, clawing at his eyes, and Jihoon closed the distance in a heartbeat, driving his knee into the nerve cluster behind Drothkal's left leg. Human xenobiologists had spent weeks studying Vorthrak physiology, identifying every weakness in their armor, every vulnerable point that their natural plating did not protect. Drothkal's leg buckled, and the massive creature dropped to one knee. Arena fell silent. No one had ever seen a Vorthrak brought low by another species before. Jihoon did not waste the opportunity. He struck again and again, targeting joints and nerve clusters and the gaps between armor plates, each blow precise and calculated, each impact doing damage that accumulated faster than Drothkal could process. The Vorthrak Supreme swung wildly, trying to catch him, but Jihoon kept moving, kept striking, kept refusing to stand still long enough to be hit. 12 minutes of oxygen. "You fight like a disease," Drothkal snarled, finally managing to catch Jihoon with a backhand that sent him flying across the arena. "You infect and spread and weaken instead of facing your enemy directly." Jihoon hit the wall hard, feeling ribs crack under the impact, and slid to the ground, gasping for breath. His suit integrity was failing now, toxic atmosphere seeping through the tears, and he could taste blood in his mouth, but he got back up. He always got back up. "That is how we survived," he said, limping forward, blood dripping from a cut above his eye. "We were never the strongest or the fastest, so we had to be the most stubborn, the most persistent, the most unwilling to die." He raised his fists again, "and we are still here." Drothkal rose to his full height, bleeding from a dozen small wounds, one eye swollen half shut from the dust. His movements slower now, but still devastating. "Why do you keep fighting?" he demanded, genuine confusion mixing with his rage. "You are broken. You are poisoned. You cannot possibly win, because giving up is not something we know how to do." 9 minutes of oxygen. June charged. The next 4 minutes were brutal beyond description. Two apex predators tearing at each other with everything they had. Blood and toxins and shattered armor flying through the air. Jihoon lost count of his broken bones. He lost track of how many times Drothkal knocked him down. He just kept getting up. 7 minutes. He landed a strike that cracked one of Drothkal's armor plates. 6 minutes. Drothkal's claw tore through his suit and carved 3 deep gashes across his chest. 5 minutes. He broke 2 of his fingers, driving them into the gap behind Drothkal's knee again, bringing the giant down a second time. 4 minutes. They were both on the ground now, crawling toward each other. Too damaged to stand, but too stubborn to stop. 3 minutes. Drothel's claw closed around Jihoon's throat, lifting him off the ground, squeezing with enough force to crush steel. Yield, the Vorthrak Supreme demanded, his voice rough with exhaustion and something that might have been respect. Yield and I will let you live. Ji-hoon could not speak with those claws crushing his windpipe. But he did not need to. His hand came up, holding the emergency flare he had hidden in his palm since the fight began, and he triggered it directly into Drothkai's remaining good-eyed. The Vorthrak screamed and dropped him, staggering backward, temporarily blinded. And Ji-hoon hit the ground in a heap of broken bones and burning lungs. 2 minutes of oxygen. He tried to stand and could not. Tried to crawl and barely managed. Drothkal was on his hands and knees, shaking his head, trying to clear his vision, reaching out blindly toward where he had last heard Ji-hoon fall 1 minute. Neither of them could reach the other. Neither of them could continue. The signal sounded again, indicating the end of the time limit, and medical teams rushed into the arena from both sides. Ji-hoon lay on his back, staring up at the observation galleries through a haze of pain and oxygen deprivation, watching Ambassador Siren grip the railing with white knuckles and tears streaming down her face. He had not won, but he had not lost either, and as unconsciousness finally claimed him, he heard something that made him smile despite everything. Heard the assembled delegates of 47 species chanting humanity's name. The Galactic Council chamber had never known silence like this before. Ambassador Yun Siren stood among the delegates of 47 species, watching their faces shift from boredom to terror in the span of a single heartbeat. And she understood immediately that everything humanity had worked toward for the past 3 years meant nothing. Now, the Vorthrak had arrived. She had read the intelligence reports, of course, but reading about something and witnessing it were entirely different experiences. And the creature that stepped through the chamber doors made every cell in her body scream at her to run. Vorthrak Supreme stood 3 meters tall, covered head to toe in natural armor plating that gleamed like polished obsidian under the chamber lights, and his 4 arms ended in claws that looked sharp enough to cut through starship hull, which according to the reports they absolutely could. His name was Drothkal, and he surveyed the assembled delegates the way a predator surveys a field of prey animals. Behind him came 12 more Vorthrak warriors, each one massive and terrifying, each one radiating the kind of confidence that came from being the most dangerous thing on any world they had ever visited. The Zilari ambassador fainted, and her aides dragged her unconscious body toward the exits. The Methane Collective representatives simply vanished, their gaseous forms dissipating through the ventilation system in what Siren could only describe as panic. Even the Crothian delegate, a species known throughout the galaxy for their warrior culture, pressed himself against the far wall with his ceremonial blade hanging forgotten at his side. Siren remained standing in her place at the human delegation podium. She was not brave, and she was certainly not stupid enough to believe she could fight one of these creatures, but she was a diplomat, and diplomats did not run from negotiations, no matter how badly those negotiations might go. Drothkal walked to the center of the chamber, his heavy footsteps echoing like thunder in the terrified silence. And when he spoke, his voice rumbled through the room like an earthquake finding its voice. "We are Vorthrak," he announced, and the translation systems struggled to convey the sheer weight of menace in those 3 simple words. "We come from Kethvara, the world you call Deathworld Prime, and we have conquered 12 systems on our way to this place." He paused, letting his words sink into the minds of every delegate present. "Your council has debated and discussed and deliberated for centuries," Drothkal continued, his tone dripping with contempt. "You have built your civilization on weakness and compromise, and the desperate hope that nothing stronger than you would ever come along." His clawed hand swept across the chamber, indicating every cowering species in one dismissive gesture. "That hope ends today." Siren watched the Vorthrak Supreme carefully, noting the way he moved, the way he spoke. The way his eyes tracked every potential threat in the room. Even though he clearly believed there were no actual threats present, he was a predator. Yes, but he was also a leader, and leaders always wanted something. "We offer you a choice," Drothgal announced. "Surrender your council to Vorthrak rule and live as our subjects. Or resist and be harvested for whatever resources your species might provide." The chamber erupted in panicked whispers. Delegates turning to each other with fear written across their various faces. And Siren felt something cold settle in her stomach as she realized that no one was going to speak up. No one was going to challenge this. Vorthrak would simply take control of galactic civilization. And every species present would bow their heads and accept it because they were too afraid to do anything else. However, Drothgal continued, and his scarred face twisted into something that might have been a smile on a less terrifying creature. "We are not without honor, and we recognize that conquest without challenge brings no glory." He raised one massive arm and pointed at the ancient symbol carved into the chamber floor. "The right of Kethmara," he declared. "Single combat between champions, winner takes all. A tradition older than your council itself, and one that even we Vorthrak respect." His eyes swept across the chamber, challenging every species present. "If any among you believes their people worthy of freedom, let them step forward and name a champion, and we will face each other in the arena as our ancestors did. And the outcome will determine the fate of the galaxy." Silence, absolute, crushing. Devastating silence. Caesarin watched the Crothian delegate stare at his own feet. Watched the Helian ambassador pretend to consult non-existent notes. Watched representative after representative find somewhere else to look, anywhere else to look, as long as they did not have to meet the eyes of the Vorthrak Supreme. She thought about Earth. She thought about the billions of humans who had no idea this moment was happening, who were going about their daily lives believing that their government was handling things, believing that joining the galactic community would bring prosperity and peace and opportunity. She thought about what would happen to them under Vorthrak rule. She thought about her grandmother, who had survived the Pacific collapse and rebuilt her fishing village with her own hands. She thought about her father, who had spent 30 years fighting for workers' rights even when corporations threatened his family. She thought about every human who had ever faced something bigger and stronger and more powerful than themselves, and refused to back down. Siren stepped forward. The movement was small, just a single step away from her podium. But in that silent chamber, it might as well have been a thunderclap. Every eye turned toward her. Drothvil's massive head swiveled in her direction, and for a moment she saw something flicker across his alien features. Something that might have been surprise or curiosity or simple disbelief. "The human speaks," he rumbled, and there was almost amusement in his voice now. "The newest species in this chamber, the smallest delegation. The people who have not even been granted full membership yet." He took a step toward her, and Siren forced herself not to retreat. "You would challenge us, little human?" "I would," Sira replied, and her voice came out steadier than she had any right to expect. "Humanity accepts your challenge, and we will name our champion before the deadline you set." The chamber exploded in whispers again, but this time there was something else mixed with the fear. Something that might have been hope. Drothgal studied her for a long moment, his eyes examining her the way a scientist might examine an interesting specimen. And then he laughed. The sound was horrible, like boulders grinding against each other in an avalanche. But Siren stood her ground. "Very well, little human," the Vorthrak Supreme declared. "You have 72 of your hours to produce a champion, and then we will see what your species is truly made of." He turned to leave, then paused and looked back over his shoulder. "I have crushed warriors twice your size without breaking stride," he said, and his voice had lost its amusement now. "I have killed creatures that would give your nightmares nightmares, and I have never lost a challenge of Kethmara." His eyes locked with hers. But I have also never seen a creature as small as you step forward when giants stayed silent. And that is something I will remember, no matter how this ends." The Vorthrak delegation swept out of the chamber, leaving chaos and terror in their wake, and Saren finally allowed herself to take a deep breath. She had just committed humanity to a battle they could not possibly win. She had to figure out how to win it anyway. The message reached Earth Command 17 minutes after Saren sent it, and within an hour every military leader on the planet was screaming at each other through holographic conference calls. Captain Beak Ji-hoon was not part of those calls. He was 300 meters underground, in a collapsed mining tunnel on Proxima Station, holding a support beam against his shoulders while rescue teams worked frantically to evacuate the wounded miners trapped behind him. The beam weighed 400 kilograms, and he had been holding it for almost 5 hours. "Captain, we have incoming priority transmission," his communications officer reported through his earpiece. "Highest classification, eyes only, marked urgent from Earth Command." "Little busy right now," Ji-hoon grunted, feeling his muscles scream as another tremor shook the tunnel. "Tell them to wait." "Sir, the transmission is marked with a crimson flag." Ji-hoon blinked sweat out of his eyes and considered what that meant. Crimson flag was the designation for existential threats to humanity. The last time anyone had used it was during the asteroid crisis of 2298. "How many more miners?" he asked the rescue team leader. "7, sir." "Maybe 20 minutes. Then Earth Command can wait 20 minutes. He adjusted his grip on the beam and kept holding behind him. He could hear the rescue workers moving faster now, their movements sharp with renewed urgency. And he wondered what could possibly be important enough to warrant a crimson flag, while he was in the middle of saving lives. 23 minutes later, with all 7 miners safely extracted and the medical teams taking over, Ji-hoon finally collapsed against the tunnel wall and accepted the transmission. By the time he finished reading it, his exhaustion had transformed into something else entirely. 12 hours later, he stood in the human delegation quarters on Threshold Prime, facing Ambassador Saren across a conference table covered in tactical displays and Vorthrak physiological data. "You want me to fight that thing?" he said, not quite making it a question. "I want you to represent humanity in single combat against a Vorthrak Supreme," Saren replied, her voice careful and diplomatic. "Earth Command believes you are our best option." "Our best option for what exactly?" Ji-hoon asked. "For winning or for dying with dignity?" Saren met his eyes without flinching. "Honestly, I do not know." He appreciated that she did not lie to him. Ji-hoon pulled up the tactical display and studied the Vorthrak physiology again, noting the armor plating, the forearms, the molecular edge claws, the enhanced muscle density that came from evolving on a world with 3 times Earth's gravity. "They are stronger than us," he said. "Faster than us in short bursts, better armored, better armed naturally. And they have been fighting since before humanity learned to make fire." "Yes, and you still accepted their challenge." Saren straightened in her chair. "Someone had to." Ji-hoon studied her for a long moment, seeing the exhaustion in her eyes, the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders, the fear she was working so hard to hide. She had done something incredibly brave and possibly incredibly stupid. And now she was looking to him to make it mean something. "Tell me about Kethmora," he said finally. "Tell me everything," while Saren briefed him on the rules and traditions of Vorthrak ritual combat. Drothko was in his own quarters, doing something he had never done before. He was researching prey. The Vorthrak did not normally bother learning about the species they conquered, because such knowledge served no practical purpose when victory was assured. But something about the human ambassador had caught his attention. She had been afraid. He had seen that clearly. And yet she had stepped forward anyway. It was not normal prey behavior, so Drothko accessed the galactic information networks and began learning about humanity. And what he discovered troubled him in ways he did not fully understand. He learned about a species that had hunted animals 10 times their size using nothing but pointed sticks and patience. He learned about persistence, predation, the horrifying practice of chasing prey for hours or even days until it simply collapsed from exhaustion. And he felt something cold move through his chest. As he realized what that implied, humans were not ambush predators like the Vorthrakthy were something far more unsettling. They were the monsters that never stopped coming. He watched footage of human endurance athletes running for hundreds of kilometers without rest. Watched soldiers carrying wounded comrades through hostile territory for days. Watched rescue workers digging through rubble with their bare hands until their fingers bled. He read about Shackleton and the Endurance, about the miners of Copiapo, about the survivors of 1,000 disasters who simply refused to die. He learned about human history, the wars and plagues and catastrophes that should have destroyed them. And he saw how they rebuilt every single time stronger than before, more determined than before, never learning to give up. Supreme, one of his advisors interrupted. Is something wrong? Drothko closed the display and turned to face his subordinate. The humans have named their champion, he said. A rescue specialist named Baek Ji-hoon, decorated for valor. Known for endurance operations in hostile environments. A rescue specialist, the advisor scoffed. Not even a proper warrior. This will be over in seconds. Perhaps, Drothko replied. But his voice lacked conviction that night. He sent a message to the human delegation requesting a meeting with their champion before the duel. Ji-hoon accepted. They met in a neutral observation lounge overlooking the stars. 2 apex predators from different worlds sitting across from each other in uncomfortable chairs, designed for species with very different bodies for a long time. Neither spoke. Finally, Drothko broke the silence. Why did your people accept my challenge? He asked. You know, you cannot win, your ambassador knew when she stepped forward. And yet you came anyway. Ji-hoon considered the question carefully before answering. Because someone had to stand up, he said simply. That is what humans do, even when standing up means death. Especially then. Drothko leaned forward, his massive frame casting shadows across the lounge. I have studied your species, he admitted. I have learned about your history, your capabilities, your strange refusal to accept defeat, even when defeat is certain. And what did you learn? The Vorthrak Supreme was quiet for a moment. I learned that I do not understand you, he said finally. And that troubles me, because I have never failed to understand my prey before. Ji-hoon smiled. A small expression that held no fear and no malice. Maybe that is because we are not prey. He stood and offered his hand in the human gesture of respect between equals. Drothko stared at the offered hand for a long moment, then reached out with one of his own massive claws and accepted the gesture. Tomorrow, one of us will likely die, the Vorthrak Supreme said. Probably, Ji-hoon agreed. But until then, we can still respect each other. He walked out of the lounge, leaving Drothko alone with his thoughts and a growing suspicion that this fight would not be like any he had experienced before.